All right, I'm going to try to capture on video what I've been doing for the past couple hours. I'm just making a Sinew string. Uh, I haven't been working on it the full 2 hours. I've just been on and off working on it. I ate dinner and did I just shoveled some snow, stuff like that. Anyway, since I'm going to be sitting here, I might as well show the process of what I do. I've shown this on video before. This is leg sinew. And someone else processed this for me, gave me a batch of shredded leg sinew, but it's not shredded fine enough. This is shredded enough for bow backing. I think that's what it was originally for. I think this sinew is about 5 years old. Anyway, to make it suitable for making strings, or the way I do it, it's got to be about half as thick. You know, for bow backing, you can leave it about 1/8 of an inch thick, right? I like to take the bulky ends off of it, on one end at least, for bow strings. For backing the bows, I like to cut the ends off completely and just leave them diagonal. Know what I mean? For bow backing, I do individually look at these strands. It's dried sinew, it's pounded when it's dry, and it's separated when it's dry. And I look at the ends. I don't want square ends for bow backing, so I cut them like that if I'm going to back a bow with it. I do the same thing with the sinew string. But see that I'd go through all my sinew if I'm going to back a bow and do that to all my pieces. Almost the same thing with the sinew string. So it's about half as wide with the sinew string strands, and I make sure that one end is not very bulky. This end can be bulky, the thick end, but the other end shouldn't have any big mass on it. So I end up with these strands, and if I can straighten them out, it's better because I can lay out a bunch of them on the table. And if they're straight, they don't mess with each other, right? But if they're all curly and nasty, they'll bunch up. I got a little bowl with water, and I dampen the sinew. Okay, it's not soaking wet. I don't soak the sinew for a long period of time. I just kind of dip it, and you'll see as I work. So I find the fat end. This fat end up here has got some extra material. Not all sinew is perfect. It usually has a fat end and a skinny end. So this is okay. But this is about the most I'll have on the fat end. Okay. Typically what I do is I'll have about that much. This much. But it doesn't matter. As you're working it, as you're twisting it together, you'll figure out if you need a fat piece or not. The more time you spend processing it, the better results you get. Sometimes the strands are very weak. I don't like to use these kinds of strands. Or even if they might even be weak if they're thick. So it's always best to just kind of pull on them. All right, so what I do is I might have a different technique than a lot of people. I don't put a loop and then twist. I just overlay. Okay, I dip my fingers in the water and proceed. I twist this direction and then go this way. There's other videos on YouTube that show you how to do this. which direction to twist and all that. Okay. So you can judge how you're progressing by twisting like this. It's going to be about, it's not quite 1/8 of an inch thick. It's a little bit less than 1/8 of an inch for each strand for like a 50-pound bow string. About 1/8 of an inch with damp strands of sinew. They're not soaking wet, but they are damp. It does shrink after it dries too. So let's say that this is, let's see, 3/32 of an inch wide, not quite 1/8. And then when you twist it together, it's not quite 1/4 of an inch. It's a little bit more than 1/8, like 5/32, I suppose. All these little ends that's sticking out are okay. Those are the beginnings of each strand. So I twist and I judge, that's thick enough, yep. This one is getting a little bit thin, and you don't want it to be getting thin here. You want it to look here for thinness, so you can overlap it a little bit. So you get a strand, damp the fingers a little bit, and I apply the sinew to the bottom twist, so that when I twist it in, it goes into the V, and then I overlap the other one, test it out. You know, as I'm working, I can feel the thickness, and I know if I need to add another one. Just always keep my fingers damp, and if I need to, if these strands are really stiff, I'll dip the whole thing in the water. But I don't soak them in the water. And I gotta make sure this is tight. I'm holding it tightly so it doesn't unravel. And I can do a couple of twists without adding another strand usually, but sometimes I've gotta add a strand with every twist sometimes. And if these strands are thin, yeah, I pretty much add another strand with every twist. That feels like the correct thickness. If it starts to feel like it's gonna start getting too thin, I'll add it, but like I said, I gotta make sure it's still thick here. That right here, maybe a 3/4 of an inch down is when you need to be worried about it feeling really thin. And it's good to keep the end of this tapered. See how it's kind of tapered, so they don't all stop at the same spot. You want to keep the end of it tapered, so that means you add strands gradually, and try. It's always best to have like a random length on these strands, but you can't always. Like these are pretty similar to each other, so if I think that I'm getting too much of a bunch of those together at the end, I'll trim them back a little bit so that it tapers. I'll trim one of the strands back a little bit or something just to get it to taper. The taper is important. You don't want you don't want an abrupt ending. Because it'll make your string all wonky. The weakest part of the string is where it's going to fail. And that one's starting to feel too thin, so I backed up a little bit. I'm going to add this thicker one. I had that one dry. but it'll pick up the moisture from the other strands. And it takes time to get used to keeping the right thickness. When you're new at this, or when I was new at this, I had to keep backing up and redoing it. If I want another strand, I'll just get it. If it's too thick, if it feels like it might be too thick, I'll remove some material. It can kind of drive you nuts sometimes. Yeah, feels about right. Yeah, I'll add these strands to the lower one. Okay, I got to remember to do that myself. Sometimes if I'm doing something else, like listening to a podcast or whatever, I'll forget what I'm doing. And I won't add the strands to the lower twist. I'll add just kind of randomly, I'll add them up here. When you add them up here, it seems like they don't get incorporated into the string as well. There's too much of a tail hanging out, you know. Now, why don't I loop it over so there's no tails hanging out? Well, there's two reasons. One, I don't like the look of the loops on the string when it's finished, because they kind of make the string really bumpy. And number two, when I look at Native American strings made of sinew from photographs, they always have little ends sticking out. They always have these little, not quite this bad, but I mean, the end of the strands start popping out. Or sometimes you'll see one of these loose strands on the Native American string. So I don't think that they looped, that they didn't go like this. In other words, to incorporate the sinew, they just laid one on top of the other. As far as I can tell. I'm just looking at photographs. And it also makes the string smoother, I think, when you lay one on top of the other instead of making a little, I call it a loop, but it's, I've seen people incorporate the sinew strands like this and then twist it in. But if you don't do it right, you end up with a little loop on top. And it's easy to do that and not know what you've done, because it'll be back here. And then after you look at the string, you go, man, it's got a lot of loops in it that are sticking out and making the string all lumpy. Don't like it. So yeah, I clip the ends off when it's dry. All these little ends, I clip them all off with the fingernail clippers. But yeah, you can use a stone flake. If you want to be all authentic about it, I just cut the end off there. See? Too bulky. All right, which one was I thinking that was too thin? Yeah, the lower one. So I dip it in water. I figure out which is the fat end. If it feels really bulky on this end, I'll flip it around. I want always to start with the fat end and twist it so it incorporates into the string like that. Where is it? I'm trying to look through the viewfinder. It usually doesn't work all that well. It's starting to feel a little thin. And I should, take time to do all these strands and make sure they're all the same before I start. But if it takes me too long to prep for something, I end up not doing it. Too much prep time, and I often just put it aside and say, it's taking too much time. I got to do something else that doesn't take as much time. And then I come back to it. And sometimes I don't get back to it for a week. That's the problem. Yeah, so I'll just wing it. I'll just do this on the fly. That way I'll get it done. And just make do with what I got. You know? Yeah, the strands are all too thick. These little things, but you gotta make do with what you got. Well, me, I do, because I'm not one to stick to my schedule. I tend to do the easy stuff first. If it takes forever, I put it off. Yeah. This one project that I'm working on here with the Sinew strings, this has been on my back order list for over a year. Yep. And one of the reasons is because I have to make sure that the string does not fail, and I got to figure out a way to make it reliable under extreme conditions. And usually Sinew strings are not reliable under extreme conditions. So I've been using Type Bond 3 glue over the top of it when it's done. Apply Type Bond 3 over it, but it makes it really, really stiff, like rawhide almost, when I do that. I think it might work, but I need to do more strings in order to test out if it's actually working. I hope you can see without it going out of focus. I'm testing the thickness. It's hard to concentrate on the thickness of the strings and strands when I'm talking. I'm going to back up. This is too thin. Yeah, and I can apply them dry. It's actually better if I apply them once in a while in a dry state, because if this gets too wet, it gets too slippery and I can't twist it very well. It's got to be tightly twisted, relatively speaking. You know, it doesn't have to give you a cramp, a string maker's cramp. It doesn't have to be crampish. Yeah, that string at the bottom is too thick. I try to do that. I don't always do it, but it helps when I do. All right, so this string actually is it's way too thin. I've been neglecting to put extra strands in. Hold on. So I back it up. I go, okay, so need to add a little bit more. Now let's see. I got a towel here because the string is damp and it gets the pants all wet. Okay, that's better. It's better to be a little bit thicker than what you need than too thin. Yeah. And you get to learn what is as thick as you need from experience. You don't know right off the bat. Yeah. You got to do with some strings first. I had to make like 4 or 5 strings and well, maybe 3 or 4 before I got the hang of it when I first started doing this. 3 or 4 strings first. My very first string was really very small diameter. I didn't know how much it would shrink. The diameter shrinks, but the length gets longer. When you hang it up to dry, you put a weight on the end of the string when you hang it up, and then you twist it. you tie a weight to the end of the string. You hang it up from a tree limb or inside. I got hooks inside in my closet. I just installed them just for this. And I tie a weight. In my case, I don't tie it on there. I just clamp on a little vise that I have. It's a little mini vise. It weighs about 2 pounds. Maybe 3. And tie it to the end of this, or clamp it to the end of the string, and then twist it around like, I don't know, 20 times. And then immobilize it. I put like a, what do I put? Like a chopstick piece of wood or something in there so it bumps up against the wall and doesn't unwind itself. You know what I mean? And let it dry. It'll lengthen itself, but the diameter gets smaller. See how it's bunching up on itself? This is what you want. You do want it to bunch up on itself. That means you're twisting it enough. So the string will lengthen. It'll lengthen as it dries, but it'll get smaller in diameter. I'll lose about, I don't know, 30/2 of an inch off of that. Maybe a little more. Yeah, you can tell that this side needs another one. Just by the length of it. Sometimes you can't tell by the length, but this, in this case, yes. You just got to go by feel. So I dipped this one in the water. Everything's getting a little bit dry since I'm going kind of slow. Yeah, that feels about right. Starting to feel a little thin. See, take off these little bulky parts. Yeah, this is fatter, a little bit fatter on that end. Let's see, that strand was a little bit too skinny. I add another strand. Yeah, see, the leg sinew is not all that strong, but oh well. We'll see how it works. I have used leg sinew for bowstrings. It works okay, as long as I'm very careful about how thick it is. It can't be too thin in any one area. It's got to be very, very consistent because the leg sinew is not as strong as the backstrap. With the backstrap, it also goes faster because you don't have to keep adding strands. The backstrap sinew is good for everything, you know. Bowstrings, bow backing, fletching, arrowheads, you know. The backstrap sinew is the gold standard for the sinew, but you can use the leg sinew. Yeah. Now some people just use the leg sinew for boiling down into glue, which is probably smart. And then only the backstrap, but I don't have that much backstrap. The backstrap is actually kind of rare, right? I mean, I don't know anybody that has bunches and bunches unless they're a deer processor. And I do know a deer processor, but not here in Vermont. That's the problem. Let me back up on this one. This one is too thin. Let me add some of these strands that I just messed with. I always add to the lower one. Okay, so I don't have a finished string to show you, but I'll do a part 2. Yeah. I'll show you what it looks like after it's hung up to dry. This is still too thin. And then I'll put the glue on it, the Type On 3, the waterproofing, so you can see the difference. It stiffens it up like it's rawhide. It's quite a difference when you add the glue on the outside. You coat the whole thing with glue. Now, I have tried other methods to waterproof strings like this, or to, make them at least water resistant, and they don't work. I've tried animal fats, which definitely don't work. I've tried wax. It just makes it look prettier, but it doesn't waterproof it. Yeah, water just gets to it the same way, even if it's waxed. It may stop it temporarily. I mean, it may, how do I say this? Putting wax on it just delays it. That's it. It delays the absorption of water, but it doesn't prevent it. What else have I tried? Pine pitch is like the worst. Why? Because first of all, you've got to heat the pine pitch to put it on there. Heat damages the string. Okay? It's raw. This is raw tendon. Heat damages it, right? So you've got to be very careful about how hot you apply it's got to be just barely melting to apply pine pitch. Okay? So you got to be very careful. And then when you squeegee it, it doesn't squeegee very well. You've got to make sure the whole thing is nice and warm. I usually use a heat gun, but I can use a fire too. Okay, once that's done, and you got all that pine pitch on there, and you're very careful about not having too many blobs here and there, and it's all nice and slick. You hang it up to dry or to cool down. Put it on your bow, and you start to notice, hey, this is starting, the pine pitch is starting to crumble and come off. But it's okay, right? You start to, you put it on your bow, you tie it on, you get everything ready, and then you shoot an arrow, and boom, all this pine pitch dust. How many times can you shoot the bowstring before all the pine pitch dusts off? Not very many, I tell you that. It's just one of those things that people can write down that looks good, but all you're going to get is a string that's easy to hold on to because the pine is kind of grippy. The pine rosin is grippy. Yeah, but it's not flexible. It just chips off and flakes off, and it's just a miserable time. Not only to apply it, but to keep it on the string. What about beeswax? Well, Native Americans did not have beeswax. Nope. So that rules that out. Besides, it doesn't keep it waterproof. It just delays the water absorption. Like I said, same with animal fat. It doesn't waterproof it. I've used lanolin too, and you can see the water bead up on it, but it doesn't prevent absorption. It just delays it. So yeah, and it'll help. If it rains, you've got like 5 minutes to find a spot to have shelter, and you'll be fine. But that's it. If you expose it to a high humidity environment, it's going to absorb the humidity. It's not going to waterproof it. Anyway, long story short, the only thing I can think of that actually works is the Type Bond 3 that's waterproof. And it doesn't even keep it completely waterproof. What it does is delays it better than other delay systems or delay substances. Yeah, that's all it does. It's more of a delay, and it keeps the string together. It keeps it from unraveling. The last time I made strings for my friend, they unraveled. For some reason, he exposed it to humidity and twisted the string in the wrong direction to tighten it up. He instead of tightening, he untightened it. It looks like, because when he gave it back to me, it was all unraveled. It was still in one piece, just it was unraveled like this. It looked like he had twisted it to try to tighten it, but he twisted it in the wrong direction, and it came unraveled. So the Type Bond will keep it from unraveling. even if you accidentally go in the wrong direction. You'll notice that you'll go in the wrong direction and it won't be too late. You know what I mean? And hopefully the tight bond will prevent the high moisture in the air from getting to the string as well in the, right away or within a couple of days. Maybe it'll give you some time. Or give him some time to put the bow away. Put the string away. Or the bow, or both, whatever. We shall see. This is it's an ongoing experimental process with this particular project. It's been going on for probably over a year. See, this is weak when it gets real thin. I gotta be careful not to use only little weak strands, even though it's tempting to use a bunch of weak ones because you can fine tune how thick it is. It feels weird when you add something really thick. It feels like you're not doing it right. But it's okay to add a thick piece like this once in a while. It's okay. I mean, too much is better than too little. Yeah, that actually works good. So are you getting it? Yeah. I've had so many people comment over the years on how to make Sinew strings. Or I've read the comments and people have commented on my video. And most of it is what they hear from other people. They have never done it themselves. So you know what that means. That means it might look good on paper, but it's not. It's not in touch with reality. Or it might look good. It might look good online, but it's not workable in real life. It takes time to do these too. You can't just make a string in like 15 minutes like you can with plant fiber. Processing sinew takes time, You have to remove the tendon from the deer leg or whatever. And then you gotta let it dry out. And then you gotta pound it down and separate the strands if you're using leg sinew. Backstrap sinew, you just need to dry it out and you're good. Yeah, backstrap sinew is easy peasy. This stuff, easy peasy. You can just separate it into strands right away. You don't have to pound it like the tendons from the legs. I've got some elk tendon that I did on video with stone tools. I gathered the leg tendon from the legs of the elk, and I did it on video with stone tools. So I need to finish that using stone tools to process the elk sinew. I still have the elk sinew. I just haven't processed it, just for that very reason, so I can process it on video. And then make a string from the elk leg tendon. Yeah. That's too thin. I'm backing up a lot, I know. It's okay. Clip off the thick end. Here we go. This is kind of nerve-wracking, but it's not like flit napping where things could go south really fast and you break the whole thing in half. This string won't break in half, believe it or not. Nope, there's no snap and halfishness. Not at all. You can do it exactly like I'm doing it and get the same result. There's no risk. No, this is not a sport. This is a handicraft. It's not like flit napping. So I try to split up my time between the non-napping crafts and the napping. It's a good thing to do because I get burnt out on napping pretty easily, believe it or not. If I get too frustrated and it's been weeks and weeks since I wasn't frustrated, I start thinking I need to do something besides flint knapping. This is not going to be my life. Nope. I do other things and I go, okay, let's try to flint knapping again after doing bows or arrows or strings or knives with other types of materials, not dumb old stone. Like bone knives. Yeah. You didn't know you could make knife blades out of bones? Man. You can make spear tips out of bone. You can make arrowheads out of bones. And it's a handicraft because there's no risk. You can make bone arrowheads with no risk. There's no snap in half. There's no chips in the eyes. There's no chips on your feet. There's no, all of a sudden you need a Band-Aid. You don't need to keep the first aid kit handy. It's amazing what world can open up to you if you use bone for arrowheads and such. And yeah, a stone knife will cut meat as long as it's cool. Stick the meat in the refrigerator and then you can cut it with the bone knife. Yeah. And let it dry out a little bit in the refrigerator. Refrigerators are great. If you live in a colder climate, you got it made. Like here in Vermont, I got it made because certain times of the year, especially in the fall here, it's perfect temperature for processing everything. The meat, the tendon, because you can leave it hanging up and it's not going to get rotten because the temperature is like 40 degrees and below in the fall. In most cases, this past fall here in Vermont was screwy because it was in the 60s and 70s instead of in the 40s and 50s. So this fall would have been bad for meat processing and all that. But usually, I'm talking in generalities, usually it works in colder weather. Yeah. So I got an alternative. Just knowing that I could do something else besides flint knapping makes everything better. Yeah. If I start feeling burnt out. But no, I got plenty of flint knapping to go. Yep. Plenty more flint knapping where that came from. So far, I'm going to do my obsidian in my shop and do chert and flint in the house. Novaculite I'll do in the house too. I will not do any glass in the house. No, I refuse because it's going to end up in my feet. Somehow, them sneaky little glass pieces are going to end up in my feet. You know, I got wood floors here. The glass will be in between. And then one day, I'll drop something on the floor and the little glass piece will jump out of the little seam in the wood. It'll jump out if I drop something. Because you know how it vibrates, it'll pop out. And then I'll step on it immediately. Because it's my luck. And I'll go, I have one piece that got me after I cleaned up. All that time spent cleaning up and being so persnickety and still got me. Yeah. I vacuumed 200 times. Yeah. How do I know all this? I don't know. It's so frustrating, the glass stuff. Oh, especially with kids too. But they start to realize that you are the expert glass cleaner-upper. So when they break something glass, they go, Dad, the glass. Okay, fine. They know that I know how to clean up the glass. So there I go. I'm Mr. Glass cleaner-upper. And then eventually I got smart and stopped buying items made of glass. And no more ketchup or any other containers made of glass. Luckily, everything changed to plastic. It's not as healthy as glass. Plastic contains chemicals and blah, blah, blah. But it helped with the nerves. Yeah, it helped with the anxiety. I don't know what's worse, anxiety or the plastic chemicals. Chemicals in the plastic. I don't know. Anyway, you get the idea? Yes? No? It's so peaceful when you do something that doesn't have any risk. And you don't need a heater running in the background because it's so cold outside. I'm going to build a shop where I can put in a wood stove. Yeah. So then I don't have to worry about the electric bill to run the heater constantly. Yeah. Have I done this okay? Does it look... I think I've done like maybe 6 or 7, 8 inches. I got a long ways to go. I don't know how much I've done on video. It looks like it might be thin in some spots, but it'll clean up nicely. Once I clip all those little ends off after it dries. But I never clip those off before drying because, like I said, it'll lengthen as it dries. And all those little things you clipped off before it dries will pop out again. It's hard to explain. But you'll have little bitty ends sticking out instead of these long ends. These long ends are good because when it stretches, some of that will go back into the string. All right, just a little bit of the end, it'll retract back in as it dries. How it does it, I don't know, but it does it. Okay, it's just physics, right? Anyway, I make it longer than the bow. What I do is, well, I'll show you how I put a sinew string on a bow. You tie. Let's see, what do you do? Oh yeah, you first you put the loop on. Either you put the loop directly onto the end, or you create like a lasso for the end of the bow, and then you tie it to the other end, and then you loosen up this end when you're not using the bow, or you pop the loop off, or let the loop go down down onto the limb. Either loosen the lasso and move it down the limb, or you have a loop that's big enough to move down the limb. This loop is not big enough to move down the limb. I put a small loop on here because there's a small tip on the bow that I made. And also you can loop it over, and all you need to do is run the string through that loop like a lasso, right? So you don't need a big old loop. But you can put a big old loop if you want. I haven't seen Native Americans that use the big old loop like you do in Europe, with the Flemish twist, you have a big old loop for the end of the longbow or the flatbow. I haven't seen Native Americans do it that way. They usually have a lasso. So it self-tightens on the tip of the bow. All right, so let me continue with this off camera. It takes like 3 hours if I'm using substandard material, which this is. This is a batch that I was hesitating to use, but I'm going to use it. All right. So yeah, I'll show it when it's done, or I'll show the process on part 2 of how to complete it. Okay? All right. That's it.